Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Alejandro Rodarte from the University of Texas at El Paso. I'm a sociology undergrad student from the Department of Sociology and Anthropology, and today I present my case study, The Internal and External Colonization of Histories in El Paso as Viewed through La Hacienda. So let's just go through a quick overview of my presentation. I'll give you an introduction on why I'm interested in this topic, a literature review, the theory that I use and some definitions along with it, the methods, the findings that I found, and ending with the conclusion that sums up the whole presentation. So don't worry, you don't have to pay attention to all of this. Introduction. So here we have a map of the city at Paso, Texas. We're right on the border for those of you that don't know. Yes, we're still a part of Texas even though we're in a different time zone. And each green dot here is a state historical marker. And these state historical markers are self-funded markers by people in the state. So they range between $1,000 to $2,500, and essentially they're these plaques that you see up here, and they can range from any topic really. They can be like social topics, historical topics, more so like preserving the history. But the main thing about them is that they are sort of advertised by the state as points of importance, as points for tourists to go to, and essentially they are these stone monuments with either a plaque or engravings on them that have histories that aren't verified or double-checked or any sort of that nature. They're just submitted by people who want these monuments to be put up. So each of these dots was put up by someone who had the money to do this in the first place. So this first one right here about the Camino Real, essentially you can read it there, but it speaks about Juan Doñate, which is the first person to cross into this area of North America. And they crossed through El Paso through the Hacienda, which we'll get into right now. And essentially this sort of idealizes this person, this Spanish conquistador, and it states their importance to the city as a whole. So next we have our literature review. So the reason why I was so interested in this is that these historical markers, for those of us that live in the city, we don't necessarily like them very much. But there isn't a lot of research into that sort of internalized, externalized colonization that we still have present in the country. Especially within Texas, a state that is so conservative-leaning and wants to quash any sort of Hispanic identity that forms. So these are the three major papers that I found talking about this issue. The first one, which was a sort of geographic study about these historical markers, went into GIS and spoke about how these historical markers were formed, where they were, and what they spoke about. They found that many of them were serving white stories rather than stories of people of color or of women. El Paso wasn't brought up many times. They were only brought up to mention that we have 88 historical markers, and only 12 of those are in reference to, and only 12 of those are in reference to the fact that we are Hispanic people. The second one this is another sociological study, and this one focuses on the fact that a lot of histories are ignored in Texas, and it sort of pushes that Texas narrative that we are an independent state, we're the biggest state in the union, we're the best state in the union, even though we aren't the biggest state. But it's essentially saying that we are the best to do it, and it ignores all the people that actually went into making Texas what it is today. It ignores the stories of Black people, of queer people, of women, and of course, Hispanic Americans. And then finally, this study, which is very interesting, was a psychology paper, went to the fact that internalized colonization is very prevalent in Mexican-American communities, but more so in Mexican-American youth, and that they don't necessarily notice it. And that it's very hard to sort of decolonize and deprogram oneself from this idea. So I brought up a couple of big words here, but let's get into them a bit more. So theory and definition. This is sort of going into the fact that not a lot of research has been done for this topic. So one of my key foundings and formative rocks when it came to this is the 1975 Morilla, Assimilation, Colonialism, and the Mexican People. And the thing about this book is that it's 50 years old. And don't get me wrong, it's an excellent read, but it's still 50 years old, and there hasn't been many updates or revisions from it. And this is still, you know, a extremely important piece of our history that hasn't been elaborated upon. So Morilla states the Mexican people living within the United States are in fact colonized, the way our thoughts are perceived, the way that we act, the way we carry ourselves. We carry ourselves to follow and more so focus on the cultural hegemony, be it, you know, heterosexuality, whiteness, these ideas that are embedded in American culture and especially within Texas culture. So the two sort of theories or definitions that come from this are double consciousness and internalized colonization. Double consciousness is the seminal idea brought about by W. Du Bois, and it essentially states that people of color or non-hegemonic identities and peoples very early on internalize the fact that they are not part of this majority group, that they are in fact minority, and because of that, they see themselves as another. They change the way that they interact with people, and from there, they view themselves as lesser in a sense. And then next we have internalized colonization, and this is an idea that was popularized in the 70s around the time of Murguia's book, and it essentially says that when a minority group is already incorporated into a hegemonic society, so like Mexican Americans or Hispanics in the state of Texas, that the majority seeks to eradicate any and all identity that they can or will have formed within themselves or within their group. It quashes them down and it makes them conform. So here we have the methods. And these are the three monoliths that are at La Hacienda, and there's La Hacienda itself. La Hacienda was a really important part of El Paso's community and its culture. It served as a restaurant for many, many years. Before that, it was a mill, and before that, well, it was where Juan Doñate crossed the Rio Grande. So the building still stands, but it hasn't been a restaurant for around 20 years. If you talk to a lot of the older residents within the city, you can hear about how they used to go there all the time. We used to have the city hall special there where the mayor or mayoral candidates would go and interview journalists while they're eating a plate of delicious Mexican food. So currently the building is being housed and is being operated by Abada House, which is a nonprofit that seeks to inform and encourage people about different communities and immigration across the world, but most importantly, Mexican-American commerce that happens in communities. You can barely see it, but actually if you look right behind the building, you can see the beginnings of the border fence, the border wall. It's probably 150 feet from La Hacienda itself. So it's at the forefront of the border. It's pretty much as close as you can get before getting on federal property. So I volunteered with Abada House, and I led these discussions, these border encounters, which are these 90-minute sessions, they can run a little longer, that seeks to inform people about the state, its history, the city, immigration as a whole. But these border encounters are usually aimed at people outside of the city coming in. So it's for people who want to visit and want to learn about history. And I was able to work with them and be one of those leaders. So I was able to meet with a lot of different people and understand these experiences. And the crazy thing here is that these three historical markers are present at La Hacienda. They are equidistant from the border and the building itself. They form a little triangle. And these three histories represent different things. The first one, like we discussed about Juan Doñate, something that I left out and the monument left out is that Juan Doñate was a conquistador, and because of that, he treated Native Americans brutally. So brutal, in fact, that when he got to modern-day Albuquerque, he colonized the Acoma tribe there, and during the first winter, he demanded all of their food. They fought back. So then what he did is that he cut off all of the legs of all the men, or boys really, over the age of 13, and made the women over the age of 13 essentially indentured servants. So when news got to the King of Spain, who had never heard about this man, the King of Spain demanded that Juan Doñate return to Spain, despite him having never been born there. He was born in Zacatecas, modern day, or Zacatecas is in modern day Mexico. So he's a man that's even shunned by Spanish colonial history. But here we have admonishing him and cherishing his legacy. The next one we have, and it's very hard to read, is about Simeon Hart. He is, as far as we know, the first and only man to own slaves in El Paso. This monolith supports and shares his history of working with the Confederacy. Because of he owned the mill at La Hacienda, he was able to give a lot of grain, a lot of wheat, and because we were at the border, he was able to trade with Mexico and help the Confederacy. So this is a monument for a trader, essentially. And here we have this last one, which once again honors Juan Doñate, but it also explains why our full name, El Paso del Rio del Norte, is so important to us, and that's because we were the river that the Spanish could cross the north and get to further modern day America. So all these histories, you know, they tell half-truths. They don't share the full story, and because of that, when you're confronted with them, you sort of have to take a pause. So here are the groups that I went and visited and spoke with. So the first was YouTube students at La Hacienda. This was the largest sample size. We had 45 people, and I was able to work with 2 sessions of them, 90 minutes. This was the youngest group. They had the least diverse age. And these were students that were brought about from a communications class that I was able to take, and we were able to work with them. All of them were at the very least El Paso residents. Most of them were El Paso natives, but a couple of them were from out of the state and out of town, mainly military. Then we have out of town folks at La Hacienda. I was able to lead a border encounter of 12 people, a religious group from Louisiana. These were the oldest group we had, but they were very, very keen into learning about the city's history. They came through Ibarra to do these border encounters. And then lastly, we have UTIP students at historical markers. I was able to travel with this group to different historical markers, not just those at La Hacienda, and able to perceive their interactions and their thoughts. And because I was able to spend more time with them, not only did I get repeat information from them, but I was also able to sort of see how their ideas evolved as more and more of these internalized histories were showcased. And this was an ethnographic study, so I sort of led these discussions, and I just put questions out there, and then I heard the responses back. This wasn't like an interview, one-on-one basis. Most of these, they're my peers, they're fellow students, so because of that, they weren't fully structured thoughts, but because of that, sort of reveals more in the sense where it's just like their gut reaction to these things. So we have our findings. So each group came to the conclusion that these histories misrepresented the city. In so many words, they're racist, and they are often demonetizing what we are to the state. The groups reached these opinions in different ways. Each of them sort of took their own route to get to this place, but eventually they did get there. And then the people that were the most passionate about this were the young El Pasoans, the El Paso natives, and the oldest group, the religious group from Louisiana. So we have UTIP students at La Hacienda. A really important quote that I found was that a 23-year-old student, upon hearing and reading these things, stated that this isn't the El Paso I know. And a key thing about this is that we as El Pasoans don't really talk about or share like these other parts of our history. We just sort of accept them as is. And because of that, we sort of just assume that this is how it is. We don't think that there's a way to go against this. Many did not know of Juan Doñete or Simeon Hart. These are not people that are taught in our history classes. As far as I can tell, they're taught in other history classes, which is very interesting because they're the ones that are most closest to us. Texas is shaping the way people view Mexicans, a 25-year-old student said. And what I found interesting is that when I asked them, like, how do they identify, this student said Mexican-American, but after reading these histories, they just said Mexican. They felt otherized, they didn't feel that connection to America anymore. The most resistance found in any group was mainly from the non-native El Pasoans. Like I said, these were military, given that we have a military base in the city. And these were typically white folk that didn't see any issue with the fact that these histories were sort of paving over the ground of what is actually there. And then there's also some apathy from El Paso natives. The state doesn't really care or like us, so why should I care about this, essentially? The next group was the out-of-town folks at La Hacienda. So what does El Paso think about this? It doesn't seem fair that these white people are telling this story. This is a 64-year-old tourist, and they're like an old white guy. And I was like, whoa, what the heck? Like, how are they thinking about this? It seems like their intention to come and learn really shaped this idea that they had. Given they're unfamiliar with the environment, a lot of this information was new. There was a self-proclaimed history buff there, and he had no idea of anything about Juan Doñete or Simeon Hart. He was just surprised that, this is something that I can teach him. They would often ask if I was okay with what was going on, and it was very difficult to not share my opinion. I didn't want to give any leading statements or questions, but they seemed to care a lot. But unfortunately, what does that care really get us? I'm glad that they learned this history, and I'm glad they can do something, but they are back in Louisiana. They're probably, doing something right now, not thinking about how to tackle this issue. So while it's important for them to know, ultimately, it just shows how we don't really, how to expand this. And then finally, UTIP students of historical markers. It's almost as if they, Texas, don't want us to be remembered. If anything, this makes me feel weak, a 20-year-old student said. Because we went to many different historical markers, including ones at the famous missions that first brought Catholicism into America, those state things like indigenous people were savages that were, made better by the Spanish conquistadors. These are more complex and more heavy ideas, and because of that, they were able to elaborate on them. I think my best quote, or my most important one, was this one right here. Growing up, I was always told I had Spanish blood despite being ethnically Mexican. My blood is internally colonized, part indigenous, part conquistador. It seems like my city has been going through something similar. where they themselves feel this tear apart of identity. You know, Mexicans, Mexican Americans, Latinos as a whole, part of our blood is native, part of our blood is white, and we try to form our identity and ideas from there. But the city and the government as a whole is trying to separate that. It's trying to make us seem like something insignificant and small. So overall, I'll quickly try to rush through my conclusions. But ultimately, people were surprised at the amount of power the state had in shaping these narratives. They were very interested in the fact that El Pasoans didn't know about these things, and they were surprised at the fact that this sort of happened without them knowing. This is a twofold problem. People did not know this was happening, and it was shaping the view of outsiders of Mexican Americans. People that were coming into the city, they were encouraged to view these things and made to see like Mexican Americans as weak, people that need to be tamed, people that need to be, have a guiding hand. And then many of these people already had double consciousness. They just didn't realize it. They didn't realize that these thoughts, they're not natural, that having these ideas are not a common thing for non-hegemonic identities. But this case study does illuminate the fact that we need to be having more research on this topic. And a lot of the research and a lot of literature review I found was present for African American communities, but not anything or hardly anything for Mexican American communities, indigenous communities, Asian American communities, queer communities, even females as a whole. And because of that, I think ultimately we should be having more of these studies for all of these groups. It's very important to continue these studies for not only Black communities, but also Mexicans, also Asians, also indigenous people, also women, also queer people. All of these people have this internalized double consciousness, and all of them have it in different ways. And we are ultimately limiting ourselves by only focusing on one of them broadly in academia. And as is, I'd be remiss to say that those studies into Black double consciousness are not being attacked right now. Of course, all of us are being attacked, but we all need to work with this together. So thank you all. I'm sorry for rambling. Any questions at all? Well, after everyone goes. And then last note, this is actually all the photos I took myself at La Hacienda. And this one is of the border wall that is right there staring at you in the face when you go to these historical markers. Thank you all.